Stacey.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Good. So
Monday, it's a holiday week.
it is a holiday week.
Yeah.
It was a fight getting my kid to school this morning. He was like, not happening it.
Yeah. I feel like that's an every Monday thing in our house.
Yeah.
Weekends are fun because they like to get up and like immediately go play toys. And my house has been big on Magna-Tiles recently.
Oh yeah, we're loving Magna-Tiles.
Yeah.
My son is building houses and garages for all his little cars.
Yes. Lots of garages, lots of structures to be crashed by monster trucks.
Oh yes. Yep.
Yeah. And so leaving without the opportunity to do building for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we are going rogue today.
We are going rogue today.
I'm not feeling well. And we want her to rest and take care of her, just like she tells us to do.
Yeah. And I'm glad that she actually is taking that permission to do that.
100% me too.
So she can't keep us in line. We've got to try to keep ourselves in line today.
Yeah. Well, maybe not a straight line. A wavy one.
A wavy one.
A wavy one. What do you want to talk about today? What's been happening in your sessions here recently?
That's a good question. We've had a lot of conversations come up over the last week or two around boundaries in my sessions. Struggling to know where I need a boundary, struggling to know what that boundary might look like once I figure out what it is that I need and how do I enforce it. That's been a big one this week.
Yeah, I think the enforcing part is key. And I've talked about boundaries a lot lately too. I think in my session, it's been like, how do I know what I'm saying is one and is not a threat or something else? And the backside of the action step.
Yeah.
What does that look like? But yeah, that's been a lot. I wonder if that's a seasonal thing. I apologize. My office rabbit just tried to jump onto the desk, so I don't know if that got caught on microphone or not.
The scratching. I heard the scratching. I don't know if
she's trying hard, but not today. Yeah. So we actually talked about this, thinking about it. We talked about this in one of our support groups last week or week before as well. Around the differences between a boundary, an ultimatum or a threat, and a request.
Yes.
Because I feel like a lot of times they all get lumped under the same thing.
Yes.
We just call it all a boundary. But boundaries are a lot more specific.
I agree.
When you think about a threat or an ultimatum, what does that sound like in your head?
Well, I can tell you in my body immediately when you say threat or ultimatum, I get I feel really defensive. A threat or an ultimatum in my mind is a reaction. It's coming from a place of I feel backed into a corner. My fight response is coming on. I need to push away. A threat or an ultimatum also feels very like I'm out of control. I'm grasping at trying to regain some of that control in whatever way I can think to do that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think the control pieces with the ultimatum and threat is usually aimed at another person.
Yes.
Like aimed at controlling their behavior or their emotions or something about them that is creating that stress response.
Yeah. It's very much what came to mind when you were saying that is that external locus of control. That codependent tendency to try to manage and control everything that's outside of me in my environment, including people, especially people, because internally I feel chaotic. I don't think I'm in control.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about where those show up for me today, they've shown up in different ways in different relationships and areas of my life. But I think about like where I get activated most right now is usually in parenting, honestly. And the ultimatums and threats come out as a way for me to try to control their behavior and get things back in line. And they're usually things that I can't follow up or wouldn't or won't follow up. Like, if you don't get all these magnetiles out of the floor in 5 minutes, then I'm throwing them all in the trash. No, I'm not. Those things are expensive.
They're very expensive. And I enjoy playing with them too.
Yeah. And they're, good enrichment and all of that kind of stuff. But when I'm overstimulated and I'm dysregulated, it comes out as a you do this, or I'm going to do something extreme to force your hand.
Yes. And for me, it's also comes out a lot in parenting. I'm just replaying this past weekend, and it sounds like my house was very similar to your house this weekend. And the other thing that's coming up for me is bribes. Is when the threats don't work, then I start bribing. You can have 2 marshmallows if you clean up your magnetiles. You can have, chocolate milk and brownies for breakfast if you just, put your clothes on so that we can get out the door and get to school on time. And realizing how ineffective a lot of those are, and how, sometimes they're effective, but they're not consistently effective, and how awful I feel.
Yeah.
Afterwards. That doesn't feel good for me to either bribe or threaten to try to get something accomplished.
Because a boundary, when created as intended, is a protection thing. It's supposed to help me feel regulated and feel better about the scenario that I'm in. But like you said, I'll give you the marshmallows if you did. Turning to the bribes feels in my body a lot like moving from fight to like the fawn people pleasing. Like, this one's not working, and I made a threat that I can't uphold because that also impacts me. And so what can I do to people please my way into this? And all of it just is reinforcing my pathology.
Yes. I agree with that. So how do we set a boundary? How do we know what boundary is needed and how to implement that? What if it's not a threat?
Yeah, great question. So I feel like there's some do's and don'ts for boundaries. Like, boundaries set limits, they create protection, they help communicate feelings and needs, they help find stability or homeostasis. They limit my pathology. They put outer limits around how far I'm allowed to stay in my pathology. And because of that, they reduce resentment in my body and reaction in my body towards someone else who isn't being controlled as I feel like they should be, because we can't control other people.
Yes.
But they don't necessarily fix problems. They don't punish somebody else. They don't always feel good, honestly. Because a lot of times a boundary will increase tension instead of resolve it, at least in the beginning space, because it has to put some pressure to create movement for me.
Yeah.
So I guess I see boundary as a statement of my action step. Yeah, I'm not able to do anything about other people's stuff. What is my action going to be?
Yeah. And I feel like for me, most of my life, even into my early recovery, I struggled, still do from time to time, struggle with that part of setting a boundary is this is this to protect my space, and it's not going to feel comfortable
Mm-hmm.
because my pathology is very much about people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
And boundary setting for me, in my experience, feels like disappointing people
Mm-hmm.
or letting people down or making people angry at me.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, what it is like you said, it's containing my pathology. This is as far as I'm willing to go.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm willing or not willing
Mm-hmm.
to do or allow.
Yeah.
And I always have this picture in my mind of like drawing a line in the sand, and I'm willing to come to that line, but I'm not willing to step over that line. And you do whatever else you want to do on your side of the line. But
Yeah.
that line is about it's a boundary for me. This is for me to know where I'm willing to move, how I'm willing to move.
Yeah.
And it always, in my experience, not always, that's an absolute, oftentimes in my experience, it does feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is the people who respect me and care about me are more willing to accept my boundary. And
Mm-hmm.
it's uncomfortable in the moment
Mm-hmm.
and not, it quickly resolves,
Yeah.
versus people who benefit from my people pleasing and who benefit from my very loose boundaries, who push back even harder. And then even that gives me a lot more information about that relationship.
For sure. I think I find where boundaries need to go by turning back to my guidelines and agreements with myself.
Yes.
Where are the places where I am feeling a lack of safety, and what can and will I do to restore that for myself?
Yeah.
Whether that's emotional safety or physical safety. For me, in being a neurodivergent adult with sensory overwhelm, a lot of times having a lot of magnetiles over the floor makes me feel like my brain can't think. Like I cannot think anymore. And so that's a protecting safety in my space for myself, but I can't threaten anybody else into doing it.
Yes.
And it's also different than making a request.
Mm.
I've also been guilty of, hey, would you please pick up these things out of the floor?
Mm-hmm.
Which gives the option of no.
I do that a lot in my parenting. It's I have a hard time not making a request. I have a hard time not asking, can you please? I would appreciate it if.
Right.
That question versus statement.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I guess the preserving environmental safety for me so that I can move through my space without so much overwhelm, creating that boundary and action step for me looks like, hey, I am feeling overwhelmed by the amount of things that are on the floor, and I really need some clean space to help my body feel okay. So I'm going to figure that out for myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after my next session, I'm making clean space.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to do it, the magnetiles are going on top of the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
Or the clean space can come by you doing it and putting them where you want them to be so you can put them later. Your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Controlling what you're doing. You don't want to get up? Cool. That's a you thing. and I need them out of the floor. So there's an hour through my next session. And at the end of that, if they're still in the floor, I'm going to pick them up and put them away where they can't get out again today.
Yeah.
Which is not about forcing anyone else's hand. It's about acknowledging how far I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go another hour. Beyond that point, it's too much for me. And here's what I'm going to do to make something different. It creates tension because they're mad.
Yep. And they're allowed to be mad.
Allowed to be mad because I don't like when somebody comes and asks me or wants me to do something and I'm in the middle of doing something I'd rather do. Who wants to clean up?
Especially when we're having fun and we're using the magnetiles and we don't want to clean it up. And
right. So it's not an immediate peace or balance. But on the other side of it, it's something that I can uphold that is just about me. It's not something that's so big that sounds extreme and that I'm not going to be able to follow through with because it's the follow through doesn't match the problem. And so that's, kind of a silly example, magnetiles, but it applies that way in adult relationships too, where I recognize that there's something happening where I feel a lack of safety physically, emotionally, environmentally, mentally. And it's the same strategy because an ultimatum isn't going to get anybody anywhere other than uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Making a request is great if I'm functioning within a relationship where we have some relationship agreements, and one of those is support and accountability for one another. And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Especially in my family of origin and some of those relationships where not everyone there is pursuing recovery.
Yes.
And so then making a request is a great skill to have, and it can get followed with, no thanks.
Yeah. There's got to be a walkout, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Step
You're willing to. And I know for me, you mentioned family of origin, and I just recently, my husband and I took the baby up to New York to visit our family and experienced a lot of that just need to set boundaries and maintain boundaries and uphold boundaries versus the usual requests and people pleasing and demands and ultimatums that tend to accompany our trips to see family. And recognizing in my body what I'm experiencing to know when I need to set that boundary.
Yeah.
And a lot of that I realized, especially this last trip, I needed to take a step back and check in with me and see what was happening for me and what I needed and take care of my little girl and take care of, the responsibility of regulating myself, recognizing, okay, I need a boundary here. This is where I felt uncomfortable. This is where I start to feel dysregulated. This is where I need that boundary. And then be able to, like you said earlier, say, if you drink as much as you want to drink, and I'm feeling really uncomfortable with your behavior when you drink this much. So you keep drinking, and if you're going to keep drinking, I need to remove myself and I'm going to go talk to some other people.
Yeah.
And recognizing how uncomfortable, again, that felt in the moment. And as soon as I set that boundary and walked into the next room, the relief that I just felt in my body, the increase in safety that I felt in my body.
Yeah.
And then it was easier when I had to reinforce that boundary because I'd already said it, and I've never said it before to this person, but being able to say it again and again and again and having that walkout, that was very easy for me. I'm gonna go in the other room. I'm gonna go downstairs and play with my son and my cousins. I'm gonna go do this other thing because I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now, and being able to use those I statements and stay in my own lane, so to speak. I'm taking care of me. You do what you want to do. It's making me really uncomfortable, so I'm going to take care of me. And that's my boundary right now.
Yeah.
And the consequences, I'm not going to get to see you for another year. We're not going to get to have a conversation for a while. And the choice is yours, what you want to do with that.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely. Such an important topic, and one that needs so many reminders for me at so many stages of life, of recovery, of all of it.
Yes, agreed. So I think next time when Am's feeling a little better and she's back, we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries in the sense of, responsibility to and for. So as an adult, I am responsible to the person I'm in a relationship with for accountability, because we have that relationship, but ultimately I'm responsible for me and not for them. And setting some boundaries around that. And I think maybe even going into, whether this is in the next episode or a later one, I'd love to go back to the topic of guidelines. I mentioned that a bunch of times, and I know that we use those in sessions with individuals, with families, with couples all the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really important piece of recovery. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with me today. We didn't go too rogue. That wasn't too bad.
It's too rogue, but important. Thank you.
Agreed. And I will see you next time.
See you soon.